Hey loves, how are you? Welcome to today's talk about the spine and back bends and core stabilization, all the fun things. We're going to start the talk off today with the neutral curves of our spine. So if you're looking at me from the side, you should notice that the neutral curves here are a slight inward curve of our low back lumbar spine, a slight outward curve of the upper mid-back, the thoracic spine, and a slight inward curve of our cervical neck. Okay? So the first step, I believe, in having a healthy and safe back bend journey is getting to know what your natural tendencies are in functional ranges of motion. So standing, walking, do you tend to stand like this? Are your ribs flared? This is actually a big one for me. I am a rib flarer. So I know for myself that my tendency when I'm standing or when I'm seated is my ribs flare open. So that may be something to take into account, all right? We really need to, I think it can be helpful if we can understand our body in positions like sitting and standing and walking. If we know our body there, it's going to be a lot better and easier for us to get to know our bodies in the back bend shapes and the twisty pole shapes and everything where we're taking our body kind of away from its safe zone. So step one, awareness. What does your spine look like in its natural setting? All right. That takes us to step two. So core stabilization. When we're talking about core stabilization, these are the muscles that help support us in these neutral curves. So we have our transverse abdominis, we have our obliques, we have our erector spinae on our back. So these muscles are super important when we're talking about back bends because we need them to be strong, we need them to be stable, and if they're less than strong and less than stable in these natural positions, we cannot expect them to feel strong and stable. And again, these positions where we're taking our body out of its safe zone. A back bend for our bods is like, it's not safe, right? That's why the nervous system comes into play when we're talking about flexibility and back bending. Our nervous system is like, hey, this is not a natural position for us to be in. Please send help. Okay? So, in order to make our bodies feel safe and feel strong and feel stable in these positions, we need to first get them feeling strong and stable in these more natural positions. So I'm going to walk through a couple things, basic things that we can work through to kind of on your journey to making sure that your bod is feeling good to take it further into the back bend journey. All right. This is also where active flexibility comes into play, right? So if we can strengthen the muscles enough to be able to actively hold us in a back bend, our body, our nervous system is going to feel way safer to hang out there and breathe through it than if we're just crunching ourselves into these positions. Our muscles don't know what to do. They've never been there before. Our body goes into flight or fight mode, okay? So summarizing so far, 1, what does your spine look like in its natural setting? 2, that brings up the importance of spinal stabilization. 3, what are positions that we can look at besides walking, sitting, standing? So just some examples. Let's say if you stand up straight, what happens when you bend forward? Okay, so just bend forward. I know for me, my tailbone usually tucks under, my shoulders round forward. So film yourself, get a sense of what this looks like. Now, can you untuck your tailbone so that you get your back into more of its neutral curves? Can you engage your lower abs? Can you pull yourself up off the floor? Can you find a nice neutral curve in your upper back? Can you find a neutral curve in your cervical spine? And can you breathe here and hang out? Does your tailbone tend to round? Can you bring awareness to that and get it back to its neutral state? Are your obliques fired? Are your lats turned on? Are your shoulders sinking forward? Okay, this is an excellent exercise. Just holding this, trying to get your body to find that stabilization in its neutral three curves. Another one you can practice, laying down. If you put I'm going to put my hands above my head so you can see my spine. If you lift your legs up and you start to lower them, this is what happens to me if I'm not thinking about it, okay? My ribs come off the floor, my lower back comes off the floor. Are you able to find your natural curves here? Which would mean taking your ribs. We want to find that outward curve with our upper spine. So gluing your ribs to the floor. Can you do that? Keep that position and find a slight extension in your lower back. So ribs are on the floor, low back is slightly lifted. Can you hold that? Can you breathe through that and keep that positioning? Slight space. You can bend your knees. Slight space in your low back. Ribs glued down. This can be very difficult for us that are known for flaring our ribs. So if we have issues keeping this is definitely one to practice. All right? You can even start moving your legs. What happens? Can you stabilize your core in those curves as you start moving your limbs? Like I've touched on before, finding stabilization in these movements is going to pay dividends for the health of your back and spine and back bends. All right. If we're taking this to the pole, imagine a pole in front of me. If you sit on your knees and you grab the pole, when you pull up, do your ribs flare? Does your back arch? Can you practice keeping your ribs closed, keeping slight extension in your low back, and then pull up? That's even difficult without a pole. Okay, so there's so many movements, small movements, basic movements that you can play with this concept of finding your neutral curves in these basic shapes. Play around with it, spend time with it, record yourselves, analyze yourselves. This is, if you guys follow me, you know that it's a lot of times I spend just laying on the floor analyzing. Downward facing dog, another good one, all right? So typically in downward facing dog, I don't know about typically. Film yourself. What does your downward facing dog look like? Do you tend to push back? And none of this is wrong. This is just about awareness. Do you tend to push back? Do you tend to round your tailbone? Can you film yourself, and can you get yourself back to your neutral curves, which would mean, for me, a slight untuck of the tailbone. So I'm finding that extension into my low back. I'm pulling my ribs up away from the floor. I'm bringing my head forward slightly in line with my shoulders. Can you hold this and breathe? Can you feel those core stabilized muscles working to keep you here? Can you move yourself in and out of that? All right. Another one, just a regular cat and cow, okay? On our hands and knees. Can you find a neutral spine here, where we have a slight rounding of that upper mid back, a slight arch in our low back? Can you start moving your limbs and keep that neutral curvature? All right. So this video, just to summarize, it's meant to give you guys things to experiment with, things to practice, basic things that you can put in your warm-up and your cool-down, or just as a standalone. I want to move my body a little bit. I want to film myself, just kind of get a feel of what my body's doing. And I encourage you that if some of these more basic shapes, if you find it difficult to find or to hold that stabilization, spend some time with those shapes. Hold it 30 seconds, 45, 60 seconds. Start moving your limbs once you feel confident in the hold. I'm excited for you all to play around and apply these principles to your own practice. Thank you for joining me, and I will see you guys soon. Bye.